Let's continue with our second segment of political parties. In this segment, we're going to continue looking at political parties. We're beginning to identify the functions that political parties perform in American democracy. We continue to determine the significance of party identification in America. We continue to describe how political parties are organized in the United States. And we will definitely evaluate how well political parties generally do in carrying out their promises, differentiate between the various party eras, assess both the impact of third parties on American policies and their limitations, and lastly, again, we will evaluate the advantages and disadvantages of responsible party government.
So some of the guided questions as you watch, you're going to go ahead and take a look at the political parties. And I want you to take a look at how it's changed from the very first part system into the modern political party system it is today. The impact of the third parties and the greater role they're playing in the American political system, especially with this recent election. Take a look at the idea of responsible party system and what challenges and issues arise with that. And lastly, let's not forget how political parties shape the scope of government. Let's kick things off, guys. Let's get started.
Let's begin. Let's begin by evaluating the party eras in American history. Now, in contrast to the United States, most democratic nations have more than two parties represented in their national legislation. Throughout American history, one party has actually been the dominant majority party for long periods of time, which is referred to the party eras. Party eras were punctuated by critical elections in which new issues appeared that divided the electorate, and party coalitions underwent realignment. Now, a party realignment is a rare event. It's typically associated with major crises or trauma in the nation's history, such as the Civil War, the Great Depression, both of which led to the realignments. Whereas a new coalition, or a set of individuals or groups supporting the party, is formed for each year, and the coalition endures for many years. A critical election period may require more than one election before change is apparent, but the party system will be transformed in such a period. Party eras in American history begin with the 1796 to 1824 era, where you had the birth of the first party system. Now, many of us understand this because we understood the division between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Hamilton was probably the person most instrumental in establishing the first party system. Federalists. Hamilton needed congressional support for his policies, particularly a national bank. Foundation of the Federalist Party came from this political and coalition building. Federalist Party was the first political party, and capitalists supported the Federalists. The Federalists were America's shortest-lived major party. They were poorly organized. They faded after John Adams was defeated in his re-election bid of 1800, and they no longer even had a candidate for president in 1820. Now, moving on to 1796 and 1824, the Democratic Republicans there. And the Democratic Republicans, also known as the Jeffersonians, replaced the Federalists. The Democratic-Republican coalition was derived from the agrarian interests, which made the party popular in the rural South, but the coalition was torn apart by factionalism. In 1828 to 1856, though, Jackson and the Democrats versus the Whigs. Democrats dominated this area, and General Andrew Jackson founded the modern American political party when he forged a new coalition in 1828. Jackson was actually originally a Democratic Republican, but soon after his election, his party became known simply as the Democratic Party, which continues to this very day. Democrats' coalition included Westerners, Southerners, new immigrants, and settled America. Jackson's successors, Martin Van Buren, was a realist who argued that a governing party needed loyal opposition to represent the other parts of society. In 1828 and 1856, the Jackson and the Democrats versus the Whigs continues with the Whigs, who were a divided party that opposed the Democrats. This opposition was provided by the Whigs, but the Whig Party was only able to win the presidency when it nominated popular military heroes such as William Henry Harrison of 1840 and Zachary Taylor of 1848. Now, the Whigs had two distinct wings, Northern industrialists and Southern planters, who were brought together more by the Democratic policies they opposed than by issues on which they agreed. And in 1860 to 1928, the two Republican eras. The issue slavery dominated American politics and split both the Whigs and the Democrats in the 1850s. The Republican Party rose in the late 1850s as the anti-slavery party. The Republicans forged a coalition out of remnants of several minor parties and elected Abraham Lincoln as president in 1860. Now, the Civil War brought a party realignment, and the Republican Party was in ascendancy for more than 60 years, though the Democrats controlled the South. Now, continuing that the election of 1896 was a watershed during this era, a period when party coalition shifted and the Republicans entrenched for another generation. It ended temporary Democratic control under Grover Cleveland. The Republicans continued as the nation's majority party with only the Wilson presidency as an interlude under the stock market crash of 1929 and the ensuing Great Depression. Here's an image of the election of 1860. Take a moment and look it over and interpret. Now, moving on to the 1932 and 64. This is where you received the New Deal coalition, whereas President Herbert Hoover's handling of the Great Depression was disastrous for Republicans. He took the position that economic depression cannot be cured by legislative action, or as you would learn in economics, he followed classical economic theorists. Now, Franklin D. Roosevelt promised a New Deal and easily defeated Hoover in 1932 with his economic theory of Keynesian. Congress passed scores of Roosevelt's anti-depression measures during his first 100 days in office, basically the alphabet soup of the New Deal. Now, party realignment began in earnest after the Roosevelt administration got the country moving again, and Roosevelt forged the New Deal coalition from such diverse groups as union members, the urban working class, ethnic groups, Catholics and Jews, Southerners, intellectuals, liberals, the poor, and African Americans. A coalition forged by the Democrats who dominated American politics from 1930 to the 1960s, with only an interruption by military hero Eisenhower as a Republican. Here is party coalition today, figure 8.3. Take a moment, look at the data, interpret the data. Now, in 1968, though, or to the present, Southern realignment and the era of divided party government. The New Deal coalition has weakened, especially due to the erosion of the former solid Democratic South, as conservative Democrats became increasingly unsatisfied with their national party. Today, the South is now strongly Republican, whereas there are fewer Republicans in the Northeast and Pacific Coast. In 1987, though, Southern delegates, 77 out of 116 House seats and 6 out of 22 Senate seats, were from the GOP. In 2009, Southern delegates, 70 out of 131 House seats and 15 out of 22 Senate seats were from GOP. Continuing in the idea of Southern realignment in the era of divided party government, you must understand, first of all, what is divided government. When one party controls the White House and the other party controls one or both houses of Congress. Both houses of Congress and the presidency have actually been controlled by the same party for just 14 of the 44 years from the 1969 to 2012 election. Here's another image on the realignment in the South. Take a moment. Party de-alignment means that people are gradually moving away from both political parties and you begin to have the upsurge of the independent. Many political scientists believe that the recent pattern of divided government means that the party system has actually de-aligned rather than realigned. Many scholars actually fear that parties are becoming useless, ineffective, and through the pattern of divided government and de-alignment. Conversely, there are also some signs of party renewal, such as the increase in the regular Washington staff of the National Party organization. With recent de-alignment, it is characterized by growing party neutrality. Many voters are indifferent towards both parties. Those who do identify with one party are more likely to belong to the party that matches their ideology. The party has become ideological differentiated, and the people who call themselves conservatives are more likely to be Republicans, while liberals are concentrated in the Democratic Party. Now, even though party loyalty has lagged, party organizations have become more energetic and effective. The parties learned that secrets of high-tech fundraising, the party's national and congressional and senatorial campaigns are now wealthier, more stable, and better organized and better staffed. Now, let's evaluate third parties and their impact on American politics. Third parties. The electoral contenders other than the two major parties, Republican and Democrat. Three basic varieties. Promote certain causes, either controversial single issues as prohibition of alcohol beverages, a major thematic issue such as the Green Party, or an extreme ideological position such as the socialism and libertarianism party. Sorry. Now, splinter parties are offshoots of a major party, such as Teddy Roosevelt's Progressives of 1912, Strom Thurmond's State Riders, 1948, and George Wallace's American Independence of 68. The extension of popular individual with presidential aspirations, John Anderson, 1980, and Ross Perot, 92 and 96. Third parties are important because they have controlled enough votes in 1/3 of the last 36 presidential elections to have decisively tipped the Electoral College vote, as it did. For example, when Ralph Nader did not run in 2000, exit polls showed quite conclusively that Al Gore would have been elected. Bring new groups into the electorate, serve as safety valves for popular discontent, put many social welfare reforms on the political agenda, and bring new issues to campaign ignored by major parties. Let's go back very quickly to that example. Can you imagine Ralph Nader not running and Al Gore would have won? What those 8 years might have been like, we'll never know. Now, a two-party governance. The most obvious consequence of a two-party governance is the moderation of political conflict. With just two parties, both will cling to a centrist position to maximize their appeal to voters. The result often is political ambiguity. Parties will not want to risk taking a strong stand on controversial policy. If doing so will only antagonize many voters, as with Goldwater in 64 and McGovern in 70. Now, one of the major reasons the United States has only two parties represented in government is structural. America has a winner-take-all system. In this system, the party that receives a plurality or more votes than anyone else, even though it may be less than a majority, is declared the winner, and the other parties get nothing. This system discourages small parties because they never get a foothold in government upon which to build for a better future. In a system that uses proportional representation, used in most European countries, legislative seats are allocated roughly according to each party's percentage of the nationwide vote. In most countries, though, parties must achieve a certain small percentage of votes to be awarded any seats in the legislature. This generally excludes extremist parties. We should rethink that for ourselves. A coalition government is created when two or more parties combine their number to form a majority of seats in a national legislature. This form of government is quite common in the multi-party systems of Europe. Yes, multi-party systems in Europe. Whereas in the United States, two-party. Understanding political parties. Democracy and responsible party government. How should we govern? Well, political parties are considered essential elements of democratic government. Ideally, in a democracy, candidates should say what they mean to do if elected and be able to do what they promise once they are. Critics of the American party system complain that this is all too often not the case and have called for more disciplined, responsible party system. The responsible party model calls for each party to present distinct comprehensive programs to carry out its programs if elected, implement its programs if it is the majority party, or state what it would do if it were in power, and accept responsibility for performance of the government. Now, under this model, a party's office holders would have firm control of the government, and they would be collectively rather than individually responsible for their actions. American parties do not meet the criteria responsible party model. They are too decentralized to take a single national position and then enforce it. We've seen this. We've seen this common behavior. It plays out, of course, in the media, more predominantly, but we've seen it. Because virtually anyone can vote in party primaries, parties do not have control over those who run under their labels. And when you receive such a concept, you have the blue dog Democrats, whereas fiscally conservative Democrats who are mostly from the South and rural parts of the United States and are resistant to any domestic policy proposals that would enlarge the scope of government. Thus, on congressional votes like the $787 billion economic stimulus package or even the more expensive health care proposal, many blue dog Democrats did not support President Obama's initiatives. However, as you can see, by the way things have played out. The Blue Dogs failed. Obamacare is the law of the land. There are supporters of America's two-party system who criticize the responsible party model. They argue that the complexity and diversity of American society needs a different form of representation. Local differences actually need an outlet for expression, and America's decentralized parties are appropriate for the type of limited government the founders sought to create and most Americans wish to maintain. So when it comes to American political parties and the scope of government, I believe that weak parties limit the scope of government in America because the president cannot command party discipline to pass important legislation such as health care. Individual politicians focus on getting more from the government for their own constituents. The lack of uniformity keeps government small, but also makes cutting government programs very difficult because no single party can ever be said to have firm control over the government. The hard choices necessary to cut back on existing government spending are rarely addressed. And divided government has meant that neither party is really in charge, and each points the finger at each other consistently. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking part in part 2 of this Political Parties videocast segment.